Warning: this content may be upsetting or disturbing to some audiences. The first story. Dalton's best friend. Yesterday, after getting home from work, I asked my wife where our son Dalton was, because it was almost time for baseball practice. She told me he's in his room. As I crested the top of the stairs and approached his room, I could hear him talking to someone. It wasn't just his voice but another as well, and I know my son's voice enough that I can tell if one isn't his. Why? Why do you have to go? Can I come with you? Where are you going? However, when I opened his door, except for Dalton, the room was empty and fell silent. My heart began to race the second I stepped in his room. The best I can explain it is little electrical zaps all over from head to toe, and in that moment, I just got the creeps. He was seated at the foot of his bed, talking at a rocking chair positioned about a foot or two directly in front of him. And it looked like the chair was rocking on its own, but I just assumed Dalton did it. "Who are you talking to?" I asked. "James." James is his best friend from down the street. "Dalton, you can see James over the weekend, but this is a school night." "Did you do your homework? I'm not going to James' house this weekend." "What do you mean?" "Because he said his parents can't see him anymore." I left him to his imagination and went back downstairs, and that's when the phone rang. It was my wife's friend who lives in the house behind Dalton. As my wife spoke through the receiver, I could see the blood drain from her face. She hung up the phone in a trance. "What?" I questioned. "I just got off the phone with Marie. James Manak was just hit by a car 20 minutes ago. He takes deep breath, died at the scene." It took me a minute to process this and what Dalton said. I ran back upstairs. "Dalton, when did you get home from school?" "After school," he replied, but that didn't tell me anything until he said, "I watched Peppa Pig." Peppa Pig was on over an hour ago. Dalton shouldn't know that James is dead. I still occasionally get the feeling of shocks in the house, in unison, unexplainable chills in the air. Dalton now says James hasn't left, but stays with us now. They still play together in his room. I tried to rationalize it as Dalton's wild imagination. That was until I got home late one night to kiss him goodnight as he slept. I walked in the room in the dark, and heard a strange noise emanating from the corner. A knocking sound on the wall. Then, I saw it out of my peripherals. The chair was rocking gently on its own, lightly tapping the wall it was in front of each time it swung back. What was even more unsettling was that it immediately halted when I looked at it. Stopped dead, as opposed to slowly fading to stillness. And in that moment, an icy blast ran right through me, for only a split second. That was last night. This morning, Dalton seemed despondent. I asked him what was wrong, and he replied with, "Dad, can you tell James to stop staring at me all night? It's scaring me." The second story. This person never existed. It begins with a Google search. One of those dumb websites that Zach told you about, one of those things someone mentions in passing that you forget about until you have nothing better to do. Homework's done, dinner's done, your little sister's using the TV downstairs, Adventure Time is blaring at full volume. So your options are sleep or browse, and browse sounds more appealing. This person does not exist.com, some crazy algorithm. Infinite, AI-generated faces of non-existent people. It opens on an old woman with silver hair, wrinkles, and emerald eyes obscured by glasses. You refresh the page and now it's some middle-aged man with 5 o'clock shadow that looks just a bit overgrown. Refresh. Asian. Refresh. Black. Refresh. White. Refresh, wait. Don't you recognize that person? Scraggly hair, acne, he sits in the back of your Spanish class, no. Hides his phone in his hoodie, never pays attention. You're not friends, but you've talked before. What was his name again? Dill. No, that's not right. None of this is right. You don't even take Spanish. You switched to Mandarin in the 9th grade. And hoodies are against the dress code. You look at the face again. It's obviously fake, on a closer look. You can practically see the pixels, looks like Zach was overhyping the algorithm. What was that all about, except, what was what all about? It feels like something strange happened, but you can't place your finger on it. Oh well. The feeling's gone now, whatever it was. Why have you been staring at this random, imaginary face for so long? You should really refresh the page. You refresh. The strange face vanishes forever, replaced by some random white dude with thin hair and an overbite. Then it's a younger face, vaguely female, with freckles and big, bushy eyebrows. Then it's Zach. That's Zach's face. You recognize every detail: wavy black hair, tan skin, that sly smile. You can see the tooth that's been chipped since he fell down the stairs at your house back in elementary school. Alright, that's it. This is a joke. Zach's always been into web development. He probably made this site himself. After all, he told you about this whole thing in the first. No, he didn't. You looked up this website after hearing about it in a Reddit thread. You've been mindlessly scrolling through your computer for some 2 hours by now. You've got nothing better to do. You would call up a friend, if you had any, but you've always been a loner. You stumble through school, through life. You're always sitting in the back of class, hiding your phone. Stop. That isn't right. It isn't right, right? You know something's up, even if you can't quite place your finger on it. You should really refresh the page. Why have you been staring at this random, imaginary face for so long? You refresh. Again. You're not even looking at the website long enough to see the faces it generates. Every time it reloads, you refresh. Faster and faster. Why are you doing this? What are you looking for? There. That's your sister. You know that's your F***ing sister. You know it's her because you know those eyes, you know that birthmark on her cheek. You can hear the goddamn TV blaring downstairs. You can't hear anything. It's too late at night to use the TV, you'd wake your parents up. That's why you've been on your computer for so long now, some 2 hours. It's either sleep or browse, and browse sounds more appealing. You might have called a friend, earlier, if you had any. You've always been a loner. Sometimes you wish your parents had had a second child, because then at least you'd have someone to talk to. But that's not important, right now. You've been on this website for a while now. You looked it up after hearing about it on a Reddit thread. You've always been into web development, and you wanted to study this algorithm. Infinite, AI-generated faces, of non-existent people, it's incredible, really. Speaking of, why are you telling yourself what you already know? And why have you been looking at this random face for so long? It's just some non-existent little girl with a weird birthmark. You should really refresh the page. You move your hand up the keyboard, hover over F5. What are you waiting for? It's just a button. So why do you feel like something horrible is going to happen after you press it down? Click. The website refreshes. Loading, you know that face, because you've seen it every day of your life. You can see it right now, in the reflection from your computer screen. Scraggly hair and acne. A chipped tooth from when you fell down the stairs back in elementary school. The birthmark on your cheek. You know everything about it, everything about the person behind it, down to the most intimate detail. So why can't you remember their name? Where are you, anyway? The couple who lives in this house never had kids. They decided it would have been too much of an expense, and they were right. Are you breaking and entering right now? You turn to leave, except, where's the door? Where's the house? Where's your computer? Where's your body? Where's you? You should really refresh the page. The third story. My crow speaks to the cursed. Darkness covered the funeral as those black clouds rained onto black umbrellas. Most of the policemen were gathered to put Sergeant Ventura into the ground. Detective Winters turned from the man's family, police, and with a scowling cigarette, he headed back towards his car. Did it go well? I asked him from where I had waited in the back seat. You know, I told them exactly what happened, he asked me, after a moment of silent conversation. The rain was making a soothing noise on the roof and windshield, repetitive, insistent and natural. I listened to that, instead of the rest of his monologue, about filling out a report, and then talking about the report to his superiors, and now telling me the whole story. I looked out the window as he went on, and watched the various policemen and their wives filing away. I noticed only half of them had wives and only one had a male partner. I wasn't sure if he was to be referred to as a wife. Can't be a spouse in this state. And for all that, they just made me write that I had accidentally shot the corpse-shaped booby trap that killed Sergeant Ventura. You finished? I asked while he stopped to catch his breath. Yes. Thank you. I feel better, he claimed. He started his car and we drove back to the hotel. You just gonna stay here with me? I asked him as I headed past the beds for the bathroom. I intended to have a shower, thinking, I admit I don't get them very often, living outdoors. I wouldn't dream of leaving you. You are the love of my life. I can't sleep when you aren't in that bed over there, in the same room as me. Meals just don't taste as good without you. Detective Winters had an odd tone of voice as he said all of that. I decided to just leave it alone. While I was showering, I realized I was afraid of him. I was harmless compared to him, and I could kill someone to protect something I couldn't even explain. What would he do if I tried to escape? I decided it was best to accept this path. I wanted to make recompense for taking a life. It meant something to me, even if I avoided earthly justice. I shaved off my beard and tied my hair back with my bandana. I looked like a human being. I finally put on the clothes Detective Winters had bought for me at the thrift store. I looked like a decent person. Corey tilted his head at me. Looks like you could find a mate, Corey complimented me. Think so? I asked, blushing. Amen, Corey squawked supreme affirmation. I presented myself to Detective Winters. Thank you, he muttered, with a cigarette towering ash atop a filter on his mouth, as he lay on his back with a towel over his eyes. He was thanking me for cleaning up. I too got some rest. It seemed like all we did was sit at the police station and fill out paperwork. I had started pacing and found I was not allowed out of his sight. Being confined was strangely exhausting. I laid there and started to fall asleep. It was strange, sleeping indoors again. It had taken me so many nights in that bed to get used to it. My dreams were of distant times and places. Sometimes I saw Curl and primitive humans in my dreams. Those were strange nights. The hotel window was open, and the sounds of people softly shuffling by, or arguing in the distance, or watching an infomercial all night on full volume, drifted in with the cool breeze. The world was outside and I had learned to sleep in a new place. A strange kind of sleep. The phone rang and I awoke and sat up. Corey was watching me in the darkness. He asked, "What is that?" "It's Detective Winters's phone," I told him. After it stopped ringing, he woke up and got it and called back. He was laying there half asleep. "You called," he sounded quiet and spoke slowly. "I was asleep. I saw that you just called. I want to talk to you. Are you okay? I miss you." Hello, someone might be talking to him. He was listening, there in the darkness. Then he looked at the phone, acknowledging that the call was ended. He gently set the phone down and rolled back over. I could only presume he was trying to fall back asleep. Then his phone rang again and he answered it and asked in a voice I only heard him use there, at night, "Please tell me what it is." I want to hear it, and there was a pause as he waited for a response. But it was his boss instead, and after chuckling, he told Detective Winters that he was needed at the scene of a murder. I could hear it. "Let's go." He looked over and saw I was awake. We dressed and went to the car. The cool night air greeted us and Corey outstretched his wings, loving the breeze. We got out of the car, at those last moments of night, at a hiking trail that led up Grandfather Hill, after crossing Sunbury Creek. I've tasted the legendary sunberries. They aren't meant for human consumption. I wouldn't recommend them. Forensics had a van near the head of the trail. The body was about to get removed. They had waited for Detective Winters. There is the trail they made to get to her. Detective Winters had his last cigarette and lit it with his Little Red Riding Hood and Wolf-Eyes lighter. He took a death-sucking drag from it and pointed with it while he exhaled unhealthy air. I want us to go the long way. I want to know the rest of her story. I stood quietly and shivered. Corey clicked that there was a path if I turned around. It was a click that meant it was only the first step. There were 3 or 4 to find the path. He'd not tell me there were a series of steps, because crows don't think of numbers in the same pattern as humans. Numbers are magical, in their symbolism, to crows. Crows can count to a degree, but they will often stop counting if the number matches the same meaning they identify with the bushels they are counting. Thus the number 3, to a crow, is also essentially female, as a symbol. Therefore, when counting a group of females, there would necessarily be 3. Every number had such a meaning. I found a stone, and when I stepped upon it I knew the path across the roots. It appeared when we got to the top of the hill. It led down to where the creek was. I stopped to get Detective Winters and heard him behind me. "I'm following." His voice sounded like he had his eyes on me and couldn't really see the path. Corey kept urging my steps and then told me. "This is where it first found her." Corey hopped down and pointed with his beak. "I think it is like a man. See its funny footstep." "What happened?" I asked. "How should I know, my lord? You always task me so." Corey flitted up to my shoulder and trembled and whispered into my ear, "It killed her, I am guessing." "What do you think?" I listened then. I had heard the forest once before. I knew this place. It could whisper, in that same tone. For just a moment it was almost a glimmer of a feeling, a childish emotion, a very crude and simple feeling, like just one note of a song. I glanced up and smiled. "Corey," I said softly, smiling. He drilled a long series of clicks that was his most hilarious laugh. "My lord," Corey wanted to hear what I was thinking. "It is like Beauty and the Beast. This footprint, that is like a man. It is a man that is like a beast. He wanted her, loved her, followed her. Killed her," Corey added. "That wasn't the plan. See how carefully it hid." I pointed where the shafts of sunlight lit each footprint perfectly. Such a thing could not step out of the bounds that were set for it by nature. Each of its movements in the forest was perfectly synchronized. Until something on its trail changed. Its movement pattern changed. It was following her, although still very careful as it went. What godless beast saw this woman and looked so intently? Corey sounded interested. I could not guess, while I studied its saddest footsteps. "This is where it retreated." I pointed to the path of its egress from the kill site. The sunlight danced through the trees as though the light were floating through the forest. In those strange shadows I could imagine the rest, hunched and breathing in the moonlight. It had watched her approach. She had seen its eyes and perhaps she had screamed, fled, panicked. On instinct the beast had forgotten its fascination and attacked. Her fragile body stood no chance and it left her there and fled this direction. I was walking its path. "I am going to get dogs out here." "Wait," Detective Winters called after me. He sensed the terrible danger and wasn't driven to it as I was. Must go now, Corey was insisting. My crow was also afraid. I want to see for myself, I also insisted. I was afraid too, but the quality of my fear was merely a sail to the fears lurking upon my path. I could not turn back and face those darker gazes. They could see into my soul and ignore me, consigning me to the void. The full moon still stood overhead and shone down in the lighting sky. In the eerie green light of the forest I found a clearing. I had followed the trail, losing the policeman and the detective. They would eventually find me. The clearing was ringed by mustard-colored toadstools all around its edge. A man lay in the bloodied pelt of a wolf as it peeled from his body. His claws held the earth and were caked in gore. Now I only felt the terror of my action. I had ignored my fear, for fear of being ignored by my own lucky stars. Now I was terrified of the thing before me, the deadly and unnatural visage of it. The beast was breathing a painful mist onto my hand. He was a little more man than creature, as his stillness grew, from moment to moment. He looked up at me. "No, we see you," Corey spoke in his most sincere and clearest English. "Why have you come to see this?" the man-wolf asked in a voice, broken by remorse, tired by rage, shamed by murder and driven to isolation. Besides the inhuman growl that its voice was composed of. Its yellow eyes stared, bleeding tears across a face not yet human and no longer an animal. "Did you love her?" I asked. "Before she saw you, nothing happened to her." Melody. "Oh God, no. She followed me," he exclaimed. When he said me, he began to howl dismally. This broke into an unearthly and almost inhuman cry of agony, straight from his soul. Hearing it, and knowing the fruit of his lamentation, is what turned a streak of my beard and hair white, and the white feather on Corey drained of color at that same time. We stood in the morning light and waited. The cursed creature in front of us sobbed miserably. He said, "I should be dead, not her." "Death will always happen," Corey told him. "Not for me," he wept bitterly. "He understood you," I noticed. "Indeed. I think it shows he is not so bad. You listen well enough to understand an animal," Corey spoke to me and then to him. He just stared at my crow. Then he confessed. "It is the beast that is evil. She loved you too, I was sure. 'Twas the beast that killed her, for that love. She did love me," he told the truth, and the hot tears washed some of the blood off of his face. Dogs and policemen arrived. The moon was gone and the sunlight was warming the forest. They trampled the toadstools and put the decomposing wolf's skin into evidence bags. They put the cursed one in handcuffs. An irony that the cuffs could only hold him while he was relatively harmless, not when he was the beast, of course. I was sure of that too, as I looked at a tree he had struck in his bestial fury, cutting into it like the wood of oak were soft. "What will happen?" I asked Detective Winters. "You know as well as I do," he replied. "Crazy guy like that will get the best care of modern medicine." "That's probably for the best," I surmised. "Yeah," Detective Winters complimented me, as he lit a smoke he had bummed off of someone. "I believe you. You know I do." If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.